Thank you, Ron Smith, for doing that for us and for sharing this morning. And we also want to recognize Bernie Feynman today. He was really a catalyst of the business and ministry initiatives. And we want to recognize him of Caldwell Tank and Preload. And here's Bernie over to my left and be to your right. And Bernie, just thank you for being a catalyst for BMI. Again, BMI, Business and Ministry Initiatives, is a ministry to help equip us, how we can better integrate our faith in our work, how we can be the marketplace ambassadors that God designed us to be. We learn from each other and we grow from one another. So what we're doing here today is important work, is to learn and to grow and be more effective in integrating our faith in our work. And I want to also emphasize that there's a free book if you stop by the Business and Ministries Initiatives table, the BMI table, titled Genius of Generosity by Chip Ingram. But there's a free book, and please stop by the table sometime today and receive that book, Genius of Generosity by Chip Ingram. Well, now we want to introduce Bob Russell, one of our keynote speakers here this morning. Well, he's an icon in this church. He's an icon in this area. You know, at age 22, he founded Southeast Christian Church at 22, and there were 120 members. And by the time he retired in 2006, it was 18,000 members. He's done some remarkable things in his life, and he continues to do that after 2006 when he retired. He still mentors other church leaders around the country. He speaks and shares messages at churches and conferences like this. He mentors leaders. He writes and does videos of Bible studies for all of us to use in our discipleship program and to use in our churches and people who we disciple. You know, he's written over a dozen books, and he's been married 50 years, has 2 adult sons. He has 7 grandchildren and one great grandchild. So Bob, we're honored to have you, and thank you for joining us here. Thank you for joining us here today. Bob Russell.
About 45 years ago, a Sunday school teacher in this church asked her 5th grade class to write an encouraging note to the preacher. And I've saved this note from Kenny Ward for 45 years. On the front, he writes, "To Bob Russell," misspells my name with only one L. But there's a platform with a stick figure standing in front of a microphone, and on the inside he wrote, "Mr. Russell, you have to be brave to be able to stand in front of thousands of people. I'm glad you're a preacher at this church, and I think you do a wonderful job. I'm praying that one of these times you don't mess up." Signed, Kenny Ward. Well, I did preach here for 40 years, and I've got to confess, I messed up a lot of times. In fact, I have a leadership talk that I give, lessons I've learned from mistakes I've made, and it's a long talk. But I thought this morning I would talk with you about something I think I did fairly well, and that is mentoring successors. John Maxwell wrote, "Achievement comes to someone when he's able to do great things for himself. Success comes when he empowers his followers to do great things with him. Significance comes when he develops leaders to do great things for him. But a legacy is created only when a person puts his organization into the position to do great things without him." I want to talk with you about building a legacy, passing the baton to a successor, putting your organization into a position to continue to be effective in doing what you're doing without you. Now, naturally, our minds immediately go to retirement. We say, well, this applies to people who are 55 and older, ready to near the end of the race. And that's going to be part of my experience that I relate to you today. But I hope that those of you who are younger will apply these principles of mentoring so that somebody can immediately step in should something unforeseen happen. But more importantly, you are daily helping to equip someone for maybe a similar role elsewhere. You're wanting to multiply this emphasis of Christ in the marketplace in other places. You know, Coach Rick Pitino had his flaws, but one thing he did well was he was able to train assistant coaches and former players to be effective coaches elsewhere. Rick Pitino has this impressive coaching tree. There are more than 15 coaches today in the professional ranks, in the college ranks, who are very effective, who were assistants or played with under Rick Pitino. Billy Donovan won 2 national championships at Florida. Tubby Smith won a national championship at Kentucky. Mick Cronin has made UCLA relevant again in the national spotlight. Scotty Davenport here at Bellarmine University. The list goes on of coaches that he trained and mentored while they were with him. Now, you are working hard to develop a Christian culture in your business. And it's not perfect. There are challenges you still face, but you want that culture to continue not only in your business, but your influence to expand to other places. I think if there's going to be a revival in America that is so much needed, it may start in the business world. And even beyond what you do in your own business, you want to duplicate what you're accomplishing in other places. What you've learned through experience and observation, you should pass on to others who can replicate it elsewhere. David Novak, former CEO of Yum, says, "True leaders don't create followers, they create leaders." Now, there are 3 reasons why every organization needs to consider a mentoring program and a succession plan. The first is the biblical precedent. In the Bible, Moses trained Joshua for 40 years. Elijah passed the baton on to Elisha. The Apostle Paul chose Timothy to be his understudy and took him under his wing. Barnabas took John Mark with him on a journey. Each successor was trained by a mentor who gave them on-the-job training and first-hand experience. Then the mentor stepped aside or was abruptly taken out of the way, and the transition occurred. In 2 Timothy 2:22, the Apostle Paul advised, "The things that you've heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable men who will be able to teach others also." The second reason for having a mentoring program, transition plan, is the example from the business world. In recent years, major corporations are given more and more attention to succession because boards have seen the business rise and fall on the strength of the CEO. So now they're thinking more long-term. In his book, Built to Last, business consultant Jim Collins wrote, "Do not fall into the trap of thinking the only way to bring about change and progress at the top is to bring in outsiders who might dilute or destroy the core. The key is to develop and promote insiders who are highly capable of stimulating healthy change and progress while preserving the core." Jesus said, "The children of darkness are often wiser than dealing with their own kind than our children of light." Sometimes people in the world will do more to make money over a long period of time than we will to advance the kingdom of God. So we can learn from wise business counsel. A third reason for having a succession plan, mentoring program, is simply common sense. Let's say that a very wealthy man offered you $1 million if you would transport his 2 children in 2 days from New York to Los Angeles. They can't fly. Somebody needs to drive them immediately. He'd give you $1 million to do it. Well, you'd jump at the chance. But if you had any common sense, you'd say, I better take another driver with me because I'm going to get weary down the road. Now, the journey of life is a long one, and somewhere down the road, we're going to get weary. We're going to get feeble. We're going to die. And unless Jesus returns, we're going to have to give it up. And if you really care about your mission and you really care about the people who are working under you, then common sense demands you think about who's going to be in that driver's seat when you are unable to function. Just as we buy life insurance to protect our families should something unforeseen happen, so we need to make provisions for our organization to continue after we're taken out of the way in one way or another. Now, I was motivated to think about a successor beginning in 1999, shortly after we had moved into this building. I read a book called Too Great a Temptation by Joel Gregory. Joel Gregory was an outstanding young preacher who had been selected by W.A. Criswell, who was the pastor of the First Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas. That was kind of the flagship church of the Baptist Church at that time. And Criswell was getting near 80, and he knew he was going to have to release the baton, so he tagged Joel Gregory as his successor, great public speaker. But Gregory came on, and they had no definite date for the transition, and Criswell had a hard time letting go, and Gregory made some mistakes, and the two got at odds, and that flopped. That failed transition almost split that great church, and many people left. And I thought to myself, as I read that book, I can't let that happen. We can't let that happen at Southeast Christian Church. The way God is blessing this church, it needs to be a growing, healthy, vibrant church for 100 years, long after I'm gone. So I asked the elders, which is the equivalent of the board of directors in business, I asked them to read that book, and it sobered them. They said to me, Bob, would you come back after your next study break? Would you bring us a skeleton plan for a long-range succession plan? And I came back with these a five-step transition plan. Number one, Dave Stone would be my successor. Now, Dave Stone was an associate minister on staff of this church, very popular, doing more and more preaching, and he was very capable, and he was eager to do it. It was just a natural. Secondly, I would retire sometime before 2008. I would be 65 at the time. I later determined that I would make it 2006, because in July of 2006, I would have been at this church for 40 years. And I said, children of Israel put up with Moses for 40 years. 40 years is long enough for these people to put up with me. I'll get out in 2006. Also, during that time, a younger third preaching minister would be added to the staff so that there would be somebody to share the preaching load with Dave when I was gone, and the congregation would sense here is another successor coming along the way. That led to the hiring of Kyle Eidelman, a very sharp young preacher. Also, I would not take another church, but I would not return to worship services at this church for an entire year. I would be totally absent from the worship services. That was signal to the congregation that I was gone for good, and it would allow my successor to make changes without having to look over his shoulder to see what my reaction would be, or the congregation wouldn't be looking to see whether I raised an eyebrow or crossed my arms when new ideas were presented. And the fifth part of my skeleton plan was the financial agreement between the church and me would be left up to the discretion of the elders, and they were more than fair. They were very generous and eliminated any financial pressures I might have had. One of our elders said, the church ought to be a model employer. I love the guy. He said, we ought to show the world this is how we treat people. And if you're going to have a Christian-based business, you can't be miserly, because Christians are generous. People ought to look to your business and say, boy, I'd like to work for them for a lot of reasons, but one is they're very generous. Well, our transition went pretty well. When I left, we were averaging about 18,500 people in attendance here. Today, they got 14 satellite campuses, and they average over 32,000, and the church is now debt-free. Missions giving is over 20%, and they have over 1,000 baptisms a year. Boy, they really miss me, I can tell. But my life has been so great since then. I do these mentoring groups for preachers. Once a month, I bring in 8 different preachers. We spend 3 days together. I try to encourage them. I've done 112 of these retreats, and they haven't got old for me. I travel and speak, and I do Bible studies, videos. And, somebody said the greatest period of your life is when the bills are paid and the kids are grown and the dog is dead. I've experienced the greatest period of my life. I was honored to read that Rick Warren, the author of The Purpose-Driven Church, preacher at Saddleback in California, said the transition at Southeast Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky was the best he'd ever seen. Now, there are some things I'd do differently today, but God honored our strategy. And as I look back 17 years later, I want to share what I consider to be the 6 most important principles about mentoring and making a successful transition. Number 1, choose your successor wisely. This is obvious, but it needs to be reviewed. You can take a 2-talent person and mentor them and make them a 4-talent person. But you're not going to take a 2-talent person and mentor them and make a 10-talent person. The reason our transition worked very well is that Dave Stone, my successor, is such a quality person. Now, he and I are quite different. He's more of an extrovert. I'm kind of an introvert. He's 15 years younger. He's more of an evangelist. I'm a teacher. So I'm not out to clone me. But it is important that your successor or the people you mentor have the same core values. You have the same convictions. In a track meet, when the baton is passed, the one giving and the one receiving have to remain in the same lane. So Dave Stone and I shared the same doctrine. We believe the same thing about the inspiration of the Bible and the deity of Jesus Christ and the purpose of the church. 1 Timothy 4:16 says, watch your life and your doctrine closely. Persevere in them, because if you do, you'll save both yourself and your hearers. So choose a successor or a person you're mentoring who begins with your core values. And obviously, he or she should be a person of character. We're tempted in every organization to be so impressed with talent that we put talent above character. But I'm going to tell you, every time I made the mistake of being enamored with somebody's talent and chose that over character, it came back to bite me. And the person you choose should be loyal to you. Dave Stone was my announced successor for 5 years. I wouldn't suggest that long if you're making a transition. 2 years should be plenty of time, but it worked for us because he was loyal to me. He praised me in public, stood up for me behind my back, and he would say, well, it's Bob's call. He's the quarterback after all. And the successor should be a patient person. If he's overly eager beforehand and jumps the gun, it can create division and unrest in the organization. And then when he takes over, if he introduces changes too fast, he creates unrest. Because Fred Craddock once said, you don't rearrange the furniture in the room of a disoriented person. And if a successor implements too many changes too fast, it creates instability in the organization that's already adjusting to a big change, a new leader. And the successor needs to be very talented. In fact, he or she should be more talented than you, because you want that person to take the organization to the next level and beyond. Now, that person is not going to have the experience. They're not going to have the relationships that you have, not going to have the wisdom, but they need to have the potential to lead and to inspire better than you. Because if there is a significant decline in the leadership skills of the successor, then the congregation will be unsettled and easily agitated. Since I left this church, I cannot tell you how many people meet me in the community and say, Bob, we really miss you. One guy said, Bill, we really miss you. Well, they forget you fast. Bob, we really miss you, but Dave and Kyle are doing a great job. And that's what you want to hear. The second suggestion is mentor, but don't micromanage. Initially, when mentoring became kind of a hot topic a few years ago, and people talked about mentoring, I thought that it would involve a lot of verbal instruction. I heard guys talking about selecting some younger guys to be with them on staff, and then they would say, you just pour your life into those people. And I pictured going into a room and teaching them, and I tried that, and after 15 minutes, I had poured my life out. I had nothing left to share. It bombed. So I discovered that mentoring is just sharing life experiences. Wisdom is more caught than taught, and it's observing how leaders respond to various situations. It is exposure. So I would ask younger guys on staff, hey, ride with me to this funeral. Drive me to this speaking engagement I've got tonight. Let's go to lunch together. Attend this meeting with me. Read over this talk and see how you respond. How about you and your wife coming over to our house tonight? I tried not to lord it over them or have a condescending attitude, and I would rarely criticize or correct. Because if I treat an understudy or somebody I'm trying to mentor with respect, and I regard them almost as an equal, they don't have a bench warmer's mentality, and they're more likely to ask questions and feel comfortable. I try to be a caring big brother and not a protective parent or a dogmatic teacher. When Kyle Eidelman became the third preaching minister at this church, he came in and it was a big hit because he's 27 years old and good looking and an outstanding speaker. And when he got up to speak, he preached with no notes, and people fell in love with him. But he wasn't here for 6 months when he came to me and said, you know, Bob, I know you've got this policy that says you've got to wear a suit and tie whenever you preach at Southeast, but I don't feel comfortable in a suit and tie. I feel like a hypocrite in a suit and tie. I'm not reaching my generation in a suit and tie. Well, I said, Kyle, we're worshiping Almighty God here. Don't you think if you went to visit the President of the United States, you wear a suit and tie? I knew I had him. He said, well, probably not if the president were my dad. I knew there was an answer, but I couldn't think of one. And so I had to say to myself, is this a biblical principle, or is this just a tradition, wearing a suit and tie? Look up suit and tie in the concordance of the Bible. It's not in there. And I doubt if Simon Peter wore a suit and tie on the day of Pentecost. And so I said, okay, Kyle, you don't have to wear suit and tie. But we went downhill fast from there. But I said, I'll tell you what, since this is a significant change publicly, we probably ought to run this by our elders and see if they agree. And I asked Dave Stone, my successor, to come to elders meeting with me. Now, in the elders meeting, we just proposed, hey, what about if we don't wear suit and tie in church service anymore? I'm telling you, our guys could spend $5 million in a half hour. It took them an hour to decide we're going to take off a coat and tie. And there was some heated discussion about whether we were showing proper respect. But I could tell which way it was going, and so I just kind of backed off and let them vent. And finally, at the end, they decided, okay, we would be more casual in worship. We walked out of that meeting, and Dave Stone said to me, hey, Bob, that was a masterpiece. I don't know how you sat there and didn't lose your temper. If I'd have been you, I'd have got angry, I'd have alienated some guy. You just sat there and let it happen, and that was a masterpiece. Well, I don't know that it's a masterpiece. But it's amazing how closely he was watching. And he learned through observation. I think you would be surprised at how closely the people in your business watch you. We had a guy in this church, became a deacon years later, said, you know, I hadn't been in church for 20 years. And he said, I heard you preach on the radio, and I was kind of impressed, but I was really skeptical of coming because I thought preachers at big churches were milking people for money. And so I found out where you lived, and I went by to see what kind of house you lived in. He said, if you lived in a mansion, I wasn't coming, but you lived in a modest house, so I came. You know, I was so glad I had my 2 Porsches parked in the garage. He didn't see them. No, it's not that. Go spread in that room. But, you know, people are observing, and they're watching, and they learn more from observation and experience than they do by lessons. Now, I had to recognize that a successor is going to do things differently than me. Dave's different than me. In worship, he's concerned about energy. I want reverence. In dress, he's more casual. I'm more formal. In preaching, he's more concerned about producing emotion, laughter, tears, excitement. I'm more of a teacher, like Jesus. But I'm not out to clone me. I'm out to acknowledge his giftedness and help him understand the DNA of the congregation and make the most of what God has made him. So you can mentor people who are different than you, but you don't micromanage, you mentor. Here's a third thing. Successful transitions require an ongoing sacrifice of ego. Now, we all have egos. We like to be needed. We like to be center stage. We like to hear compliments. I don't care who you are, you got an ego. Now, you know what? If there's no fear, there's no courage. You're just foolhardy. Because courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is action in spite of fear. And if there's no ego, there's no humility. You're just insecure, or you lack ambition. When you get serious about mentoring somebody who can succeed you or duplicate what you're doing, compete with you, it requires an ongoing sacrifice of ego. Now that is a gradual process, constantly occurring. It is not a one-time event. I remember the first time my secretary, my administrative assistant, said to me, "Bob, could you do a funeral on Friday?" I said, "Well, I have an appointment I've just got to keep. I can't do it. Would you ask Dave Stone if he would do it?" And she said, "Well, actually, Dave Stone was their first choice. He couldn't do it, wondered if you could." Now, you may smile at that. But I'm telling you, if you know what it is to lead, you know how that is a blow to your ego. And people will say to me, "My kids rather hear Dave Stone preach than you." And I see people hug him and dote over his children, give him Christmas gifts and give him better seats at the ball game than I get. And the elders decide the last 3 years, well, we're going to have to up Dave's salary so that it'll be commensurate with Bob's when he takes over. So he would get a 10% raise every year. I got a 3% raise. Now, you have to ask yourself, why am I here? In fact, when we hired Kyle Eidemann, the congregation went crazy over him, preaching without notes. People stop me in a hallway and say, "Hey, how long you been preaching? You still use notes when you preach?" A kid comes in here, he doesn't use any notes, and they'd laugh. I'd laugh too. It was a fake laugh, but I got tired of hearing it. One day, Denny Crum, U of L former coach, said to me, "Hey, Bob, the John Wooden Classic is up in Indianapolis. I know you've always wanted to meet Coach Wooden. Why don't you go with me Saturday night and I'll introduce you to Coach Wooden?" I said, "That'd be great." Kyle was preaching that weekend. So I went to him and I said, "Kyle, when you preach on Saturday night, I'm not going to be here because I'm going to go meet Coach John Wooden." He said, "Oh, that's nice. You tell Coach Wooden I said hi." I said, "You know Coach Wooden?" We said when I was an associate minister in California, he used to come to our church. I go to Indianapolis. I meet Coach Wooden. I have a great conversation with him. And then I said, "Oh, Coach, a guy by the name of Kyle Eidemann said tell you hello." And Coach Wooden said, "Kyle Eidemann, you know, he's the only preacher we ever had didn't use notes when he preached." I couldn't get away from Indianapolis. So what I'm saying, you start being a mentor to someone, and all of a sudden, you got to swallow your pride. And you have to ask yourself, why am I here? Am I here to be the center of attention, or am I here to exalt Jesus Christ? I know some people who lead businesses and churches that actually hope the thing falls apart when they leave. It will make them feel more important. But I have to be big enough to swallow my pride and say, he must increase, I must decrease. More importantly, I need to pray, Lord, I want to hear you say, "Well done," one day at the end. Jesus said, "Whoever seeks to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will find it." Why are you here? Exalt Jesus Christ? Create a business that's going to go on for the next generation? Create some competition somewhere else to do the same thing you're doing? Or are you here to be important? Here's a fourth suggestion. Establish a realistic timetable and stick to it. In the book, Too Great a Temptation, this is a major problem at First Baptist in Dallas. Griswold asked Gregory to come on, but he did not set a date when it was going to take place. Now, in a track meet, there is a line on the asphalt where you can begin the transition, and there's another line where the transition must have taken place. And then the guy who gives the baton up doesn't run alongside coaching and telling the successor what to do, but after it's given away, he crosses the infield and cheers him on. But when I saw what happened at First Baptist in Dallas, I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to set a date in advance, unemotionally, and unless God intervenes with a dramatic, undeniable red light, I'm going to stick to it. Now, I hear people say, I think I'll know when it's time. Let me tell you, when you think it's time, it's too late. I have a friend, preacher friend in Georgia, preached at Mount Carmel Christian Church in Atlanta. He said, I was at Mount Carmel for 44 years, should have been 40. Or I hear people say, well, I've got close friends, they'll tell me. I've got associates on the job. Listen, by the time they muster up the courage to tell you, you're a year too late. I think we ought to want to go out on the top of the bell curve, not on the downside when we're tearing down what we took years to build up, and the successor has to reverse the momentum. We need to establish a date that is unemotional and stick to it. That eliminates speculation for us in the congregation, for you in business, and it eliminates hurt feelings on staff and avoids division. That requires a decisive spirit and a holy obstinance. About 5 or 6 months after we announced, like 5 years in advance, our transition plan, I had 3 guys from this church ask me to go on a brief golf trip. They weren't elders, deacons, but influential people in the community, influential in the church, friends of mine I respected. At supper the first night, they said, Bob, we got to tell you, this isn't really a golf trip. We're businessmen, and we think you're making a mistake in your transition. We think you're too young, you're quitting too young, and we're not sure that your successor is going to be able to carry it. Now, all I had to do at that point was blink and say, well, that's nice of you to say so. We thought, let me go back, I'll talk with the elders and tell them what you said. But I knew I couldn't quit. And I said, hey guys, that's a boost to my ego, thank you. But the elders have decided over a period of time, we prayed about it, we know this is the right thing to do, let's play golf. Ted Engstrom defined integrity as doing what you say you're going to do. And Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything beyond that comes of the evil one. Number 5, make a clean break and get out. I saw too many retired preachers hanging on and hindering the work that they gave their lives to establish. Now, there are some exceptions to this rule. We're talking about a father and son transition over here. That sometimes works well. Or sometimes the giftedness of the person departing is complementary to the successor, and the two get along really well. For example, a preacher may have strong pastoral gifts, and the new guy has strong preaching gifts, and the two can blend. But this is almost universally true. Make a clean break and get out. Especially true after you have a founding president of the organization, or somebody's been there a long time. If you stay on, you are second guessing and you're getting your feelings hurt, and you're listening sympathetically to criticism, you make life miserable for your successor. He may not admit that, but it's true. And so I told Dave Stone, if people say, hey, tell Bob he can stay on, you just say, Bob can stay as long as he wants, but I'm going to get out for your sake. And that was not only a good thing for my successor, it was good for me. Because it was hard for me to come back into what I had worked with for so many years and just be a worshiper for a lot of different reasons. I came back for a Christmas program on Christmas Eve. It was a great service. Music was great. Kyle preached a sermon They were doing a series on the colors of Christmas. He preached a great sermon about white Christmas, and they even sang a hymn at the end, for me, and white, who wash you whiter than snow. And all of a sudden, we're singing this last song, and it started to snow in the auditorium. And I thought, who's going to clean up all this confetti? And then a crystal hit my arm. I said, my stars, that's not a confetti. They've got a snow machine in here. Wonder how much that snow machine costs. If I'd have been at a meeting and they talked about bringing a snow machine in, would I have endorsed that? I think I probably would have, but I would have qualified it by saying, well, next year we're not going to have any special effects because we don't want this to be about this year's special effects. We're better than last year's special effects. We want to be sure we're focusing on Christ. I wouldn't allow it next year. Everybody around me would say, oh, Lord, thank you that you washed me whiter than snow. I'm sitting there thinking, how much that cost? What am I gonna do? Now, if I had been at any other church, I'd have been right into the worship service. But here, I'm so familiar with what goes on behind the scenes, it was hard for me to come back in. That's why it's good, I think, even in business, when you make when you step aside, you make a clean break, you get out, better for your successor and probably better for you. One other thing. Enlist organizational commitment. Communicate clearly to your organization what you intend to do. Patrick Lencioni, who's written a lot of books about business, business consultant, tells about being in a particular business, and as he interviewed the people on the ground floor, everybody was upset because they had heard a rumor. Fred, the vice president, was spreading the rumor that he was going to be the successor to the president. And nobody had confidence in Fred to do it, and the president was getting old. So at the last day, Lencioni said, I consulted with the president, and I said, do you know what Fred has been telling people? He said, I know. Fred's been telling people I've tagged him as my successor, but that's not true. Fred couldn't do it. And Lencioni said, what are you going to do about it? He said, oh, I don't have time for silliness like that. And Lencioni said, time and energy, how much would it take? Pick up the phone and say, hey, Fred, I hear you've been telling people you're my successor. That's not true. It better stop or something bad's going to happen to you. Have a good day. It wouldn't take very long. But why don't we do that? Because we're so hesitant to confront. We say we don't want to hurt people, but really we're people pleasers and we don't want to be hurt. But sometimes it takes effort to communicate with the organization exactly what the intent is. Don't think you're going to sneak up on them. I guarantee you they've got their antennas up. They're speculating. Respect their intelligence. Honor their membership in your organization. Give them insider information. They don't want to hear it from somebody else. They want to hear it from you. So in this church, we announced 5 years out. Here's what's going to happen in the next 5 years. In the 5 years, 2006, Bob Russell is going to retire. Then in January of the final year, we had a 5-week sermon series on what it means to be a member of Southeast Christian Church, and we had a re-enlistment program. We said as of January 1st, nobody is a member of Southeast Christian Church. We want to clean up our books, among other things, but we got people on the books who are dead and we didn't know it. People have moved, people have transferred, and we want everybody, if you don't care enough to fill out a form in the next 2 months, you shouldn't be a member. And everybody knew in this I'm In campaign, there was a transition time, and they were pledging their loyalty to Jesus Christ and not just the preacher. And that was very, very beneficial for us. But before the congregational commitment comes our board's commitment. When I brought in that skeleton plan, transition plan, the elders said, we need some time to think this over. A few were uncertain. Some wanted to do a nationwide search. So they prayed, they discussed, they were determined to be unified. And after 6 months, all the board was unanimous. You know, if you have unity at the core, you can go through a lot. It's when you have disharmony at the core that you're on shaky ground. And everybody came out of board meeting and said, we're behind Dave Stone. This is our success. A very outspoken older woman came up to Matt Shelfont, who was chairman of the board shortly before I retired. She said, I want to know what you're going to do when the man who started and built this church is gone. Matt said, ma'am, the man who started and built this church died on the cross and rose from the dead 2,000 years ago. We're going to be just fine. Let me close by telling you of the first elders meeting after I left. The chairman said, we're not going to have an elders meeting tonight. Let's go down sanctuary. On the huge platform, they had a lone chair on one side and another chair on the other side. Dave Stone wants you to sit here. Kyle, you sit here. This is where you're going to be preaching. This is where you're going to be influencing people. We want to pray that God will anoint your leadership and make this congregation what God wants it to be. And one by one, the elders laid hands on each one and prayed for God to bless. Unbeknownst to Dave and Kyle, some of their close friends had been invited, and they feel a hand on their shoulder and hear the voice of a close friend praying for them. Then unbeknownst to Dave and Kyle, their family had been contacted. One family came from Joplin, Missouri. Another family came from Cincinnati. They feel a hand on their shoulder and they hear their mother praying for them and their dad praying for them. They said, boy, tears flowed and the Holy Spirit came down. And that's one of the reasons that God blessed this church. That it's about exalting Jesus Christ, not self. Achievement, Maxwell says, comes to someone when he's able to do great things for himself. Success comes when he empowers his followers to do great things with him. Significance comes when he develops leaders to do great things for him. But a legacy is created only when a person puts his organization into the position to do great things without him. The things that you heard me say, Paul said, you entrust to reliable people who will be able to impact others as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, for that wonderful message in the 6 principles of succession. I think we can all learn from that and grow from that. I know at Coca-Cola Consolidated, we spend a lot of time on succession planning of a lot of our key leadership, and it's just so important. If you want to keep the culture the same, you want to continue to grow, you want to continue to refine. It's just so important. So thank you for your very important message on succession. We're going to open this up for a Q&A. We have 2 microphones that we're going to be circulating back in the audience to all of you. So I'd love to open this up for some questions. Are there any questions by any of you?
In a lot of businesses, Bob, there's family members, friends that are typically targeted and groomed for leadership. And in a lot of, at least businesses. In Southeast, Rusty was on staff and yet he wasn't groomed for that. He ended up doing his own church. Could you speak a little bit to when is it appropriate for family members and friends to be groomed for leadership and when it's better not to?
My son was not ready for it. He knew he wasn't ready for it, and I didn't want him to do it because I wanted to make a clean break. I wanted to have another chapter in my life. I do it. If he had taken over, I'd have still been directly involved in one way or another. Sometimes it works well for a father and son. But I think it's rare that it continues to do well unless the son is super capable. And to be sure of that, I think we need to allow whatever board we're accountable to make that decision rather than us making the decision ourselves. And if the people at the core of the church say, man, your son is really gifted, we want him, it's going to make a legacy that we can continue, then I think it works. But there has to be a unity at the core rather than feeling this is a decision of nepotism. But it takes a really objective decision on the part, not just of the departing person, but of the board to whom he's accountable.
Bob, you talked about the duration. You know, first you thought of 5 years, and then you ended up 2 years of this transition. Can you tell us about the things that we would want to think about to determine the time?
Yeah, mine was 5 years, and I stayed until the last 6 months. I said, I think 2 years would normally be enough, because you can become a lame duck in there unless you're really aggressive, and don't let that happen. I sensed the last 6 months or so I was becoming a lame duck, and people were just sitting waiting for me to step aside. And so I said I was going to step aside in June of 2006 with the elders' endorsement. I said in January, from this point on, Dave Stone is the senior minister. I'm still going to be here. I'm going to still speak the times, but if you have any criticism, take them to Dave Stone. And I let Dave be the senior minister from that time. In passing the baton in a race, one of the difficult qualifications is the man releasing the baton has to keep running full speed until it is taken away from him. And there's a real temptation for the runner in track to let up those last few steps. So I think in order to avoid that lame duck experience, you got to keep running full speed. But I would not, in most instances, do it 5 years. I would do it 2 years at the most. I think you, as a person, can have in your mind what you're going to do, but you don't announce it to the organization until then.
Hi, Bob. You talked about leaders, new leaders coming into an organization and sometimes making changes too quickly and basically, messing things up in the middle of instability. Would it be a good idea for organizations to institute a policy of say, no major changes for the first 6 months or whatever that might be, to help rein in some of the egos of new leaders, or that desire to kind of come in and just go scorched earth?
I'm not big on a whole lot of policies. I think if we hire the right person, they're going to listen to the wisdom of the people of the past and say, now here's the way things have been going. They're going to be really eager for these new ideas. And every once in a while, depending on where the organization is, if you're on the downside of the bell curve and things are falling apart, in order for an organization to reverse, you've got to have a brutal defining of reality. Somebody's got to say, hey, let's admit we're not a great organization. Let's admit we got problems. And then you can have a core leadership that is willing to make major changes, and they get unity at the core, say we're going to do whatever it takes. And the third thing is there has to be a drastic change of some kind, a rebooting of leadership or relocation or merger or something to reverse that trend. So I hate to have a policy that says a new person coming in can't make abrupt changes, because sometimes abrupt changes may be appropriate. So we had a policy in our policy manual years ago that said we would, if somebody wanted to use the fireside room, they could do so by calling the church, for example, for 50th wedding anniversary. And we had a woman call the church, ask if she could use the fireside room for her parents' 60th wedding anniversary, and the person on staff said, no, we just do 50th. Oh, no. I went through the roof. But policies and procedures can become so much bureaucracy it hurts you. But I think if we're bringing a person in and we're saying, hey, we're on the upside, that we want to, in exchanging the baton, if the person reaching back and the person reaching forward, they actually gain a step. And if the momentum's going and you gain a step, then you can say to the person, look, things are going pretty well. We don't need any abrupt changes right now, because to adjust to a new leader is going to be an abrupt change in itself. Let's keep doing what we've been doing with minor changes. And then after you're here a year, you can start implementing some of those changes.
Hi, Bob. Thank you so much for sharing your awesome wisdom. But I wanted to see if there's any way we could get a copy or an outline of this talk, or maybe that you've done a video of it. It's very, very good.
Well, thank you. I wrote a book about this a few years ago called Transition Plan. It's kind of out of print, but I think that you can still get it on Amazon or somewhere, that's where I would go.
Morning, Bob. Could you comment, something that was amazing to me is the fact that something you may have left out of your talk. You gave Dave a major assignment, or the church did, to basically manage the project of finding this campus and building it and everything. And I think for me, when I heard that the transition was happening, I had doubts as far as Dave's ability to step into your shoes. But watching him manage that from a distance, I gained a lot of confidence in him. Could you just talk about that for a minute?
Yes, cut out of my talk for time, and I was still too long. During that transition you're giving the successor additional responsibility and letting the organization, people in the organization, see that person is handling that. Because we put people in a box and we don't let them grow out of the box. And we say, we know them when they first came in. When Dave first came in, he's a college minister and he had a great sense of humor, and people want to put him in that box. And they maybe failed to see the leadership abilities that he had. So the leadership responsibilities that we gave him became pretty large, and he not only proved himself, he grew during that, but like you're saying, people in the congregation saw, hey, this guy's doing this pretty well, and gained respect for him. Thank you.
I got a quick question, Bob. Have you seen in other churches because it seems like what you're talking about here seems to be unique. Have you seen good succession plans like what you just described at other places?
They are unique, but there are some that are doing really, really well. And I've seen a few that are father and son. I've seen a few that are looking at what we did here and duplicating it, but they consult with me or somebody else again and again, because I'm telling you, the two most important things are a quality successor, but a willingness to step aside and swallow your pride on the part of the person leaving is very difficult to do.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob, for that very important message and what we can learn from that, what all of us can learn from that in terms of succession planning and mentorship. And I loved how you started off with Moses and Joshua, and then how you even mentioned Paul and Timothy and 2 Timothy 2:2, and what a great example that is in terms of 2 Timothy 2:2 about how we can pour into others and continue really to reproduce, just like Jesus did the disciples. Then the disciples went and shared the gospel around the world, and we're Christians today because of that, because of them sharing the gospel. So thank you for this very important message. And the amazing thing is, after Bob wore a suit and tie I worked at Coca-Cola Consolidated. We have 17,000 employees, and we have a lot of, we call them we're teammates, and we have a lot of millennials, and we never wear a suit and tie and a jacket and tie, but Bob has worn a suit and tie for 40 years, and I thought, boy, I'm introducing Bob Russell, I better wear a suit and tie.